one thing I was going to say first.
We're live now, so go on, Jeff. What were you going to say?
Uh, well, it's just a little nitpicky technical thing. Is that the previous review, the episode's actually just called Betrayal. There's no "the" in the name, but anyway.
Okay, that will be attended to.
Okay. But this episode is called "Have a Conscience." That's which I'm currently typing into. I don't know how to spell conscience. Can you help me out?
CON and then science. SCIENCE.
If I can spell science. Yeah, I wasn't quite prepared.
I hope I spelt that right.
Yeah.
SCI.
All right, so it's season 5, episode 13 of Homicide: Life on the Street. Have a Conscience, which was written by James Yoshimura and directed by Yuli Edel. And it originally aired January 17th, 1997 on NBC, of course. And I'm going to read a summary / review by David B226 Morris, and then Ben and I will chat after that about not only his opinion on the episode, but also he may have a better opportunity to talk about ESTP behavior, considering this episode was very focused on Mike Kellerman, ESTP. So anyway, here's what Mr. Morris says. Usually on Homicide, a certain amount of time would pass between each episode. Occasionally in the first season, and of course in the multi-part stories that the show would do every so often, episodes would take place only a few hours apart. But for the most part, there was a passage of about a week between episodes. This is why it is highly unusual that Have a Conscience takes place the day after Betrayal. In one sense, it works because a lot of the pain and anger that hung over most of the detectives is still very fresh. The most obvious case is between Bayless and Pembleton. After revealing an agonizing secret, Tim no longer feels comfortable partnering with Frank or even talking with him. Frank is clearly unsettled by this because he is constantly trying to get his partner to work with him again on an old case. Bayless, however, rebuffs these attempts, and by the end of the episode, Frank is just plain pissed at Tim. For the next few episodes, okay, I'll skip that part. This is symbolic of his return to normality, or at least as close as he can get to it these days. Unfortunately, this isolation will begin to have ripples in his personal life very soon. However, it quickly becomes clear that even though Kellerman has been cleared by the grand jury and is back in the rotation again, his life cannot return back to normal.
1 moment.
We see this pretty clearly.
SP children, I'll just silence the SP children. Oh, she switched the mic off. Go on, Jeff. Because Maria's going to talk later on about ESTP, as her father's an ESTP. Go on, Jeff.
Okay. We see this pretty clearly when Captain Gaffney comes up to Mike and asks him point blank how much money he took from the Rowlands. This question and his subsequent smile after Kellerman knocks over a file cabinet in frustration represents Gaffney at his most contemptible, though it turns out he is capable of sinking lower. This, however, is only the first example of how people have begun to view him differently. He also takes very personally his first case back, the death of a Korean grocery store owner who has apparently been executed by one of Luther Mahoney's drug pushers. The grocer is repeatedly referred to as an honorable man, and the more Mike looks at his death, the more angry he gets. When Mike finally gets a chance to interrogate Mahoney, the first crack he's had in him in 6 months, he flies off the handle at the cool contempt that Mahoney seems to hold towards him and the victim. This may be the incident that crystallizes Kellerman's hatred of Luther. And I'll skip the next part, another spoiler. Okay, all of this is very well done and written. Unfortunately, the episode then takes a decided downturn when Kellerman gets off duty and goes back to his boat. Meldrick, who has witnessed most of Mike's behavior and is understandably concerned, comes on his boat to find Mike cleaning his refrigerator with his gun not more than a foot away from him. Mike seems very fixated and then falls into a rage. All of his frustrations over the past few months come bubbling out, and he starts sounding more and more frantic, suicidal almost. Lewis, who is understandably freaked by what he thinks is happening to his partner, tries to talk him down from his anger and sadness. This is very intense stuff for the first 5 minutes. But the longer and longer the dialogue progressed, the more detached from it the viewer becomes. We remember that this is just a television show and that the writers aren't going to kill off Reed Diamond's character. The entire set piece on Mike's boat takes more than 18 minutes, and by the end of it, you think that the writers just ran out of things to say a few minutes before. Clearly, the scene is supposed to be reminiscent of the classic 3 Men and Adina, which, like this, was basically a long sequence of people talking about something very painful. Unfortunately, the scene is nowhere near as sure-footed or dramatic. It is even more upsetting because this episode comes from the pen of James Yoshimura, who is usually so brilliant at expressing pure anguish. Here, it just becomes excruciating and repetitive. One can't help but think Yoshimura was saying, "This will crack the Emmy nominations," when he wrote the script. Didn't work. The episode has some good ramifications. Meldrick and Mike emerge from the incident closer together, unlike Frank and Tim, who have a wedge between them now. Okay, more spoilers. Okay, the ultimate effect of Have a Conscience is somewhat schizophrenic. There is some very good work done by Reed Diamond and Clark Johnson, but they are hampered by the script in the end. Eric Todd Dellums does a fine job at making Mahoney seem loathsome as usual, and Jade Wu is memorable as the Korean grocery store owner's wife, but the rest of the guest cast is not particularly memorable. There is potential for greatness in this episode, but it ultimately ends up falling pretty far from it. My score, 6.8. So that's what he says. Ben, what do you say?
I say I give his review 0 out of 10. Because
wow.
Yeah, because he's completely wrong. Because if the thing is, oh, he can't die because he's a cast member, but we already seen there's a set trend in Homicide where people can leave dramatically, and plus, it's interesting for the character, the interaction between the two. For this is why I brought Maria in to talk about ESTPs and how the way they see honor as it's like all or nothing, and they have this sort of I suppose it's like the idea if you're going to be honorable, you have to be completely 100% honorable, or it means nothing. I thought it was a good insight into initially, and also they kept the uncertainty during that interaction with Lewis, because the audience might be thinking, "Oh, is he going to try and kill Mahoney?" That's what my initial thoughts were. So then it was thinking, more about suicide. And then I also like the fact that Kellerman did something that I thought was consistent with ESTP, is when he started then bringing up Crissetti in an insensitive way, because Crissetti, Lewis's old partner, committed suicide. And Lewis came back at him. Why you got to go there, man? Bringing that up. So that was a good parallel, because then we sort of got Lewis's feelings about not being there for Crissetti and blaming himself, and that he felt that Crissetti could have come to him, but then he also felt that that he wanted to keep it sort of like some emotional distance from him, because he thought that's what Crissetti wanted, and it was like a relationship between cops. And so he feels bad for, because he felt that Crissetti should have come to him. But of course, there is something. The reason why that actually happened, though, is that the actor got written out by the network, and they decided, and he didn't want to come back, so they decided to, turn it into a suicide. And I think Jeff quoted the actor as saying, "Whatever you do, don't have my character commit suicide." And then that's what they did do.
Yeah, there was some back and forth on that when they decided they were going to kill him off, and he said, "Well, at least have me die in the line of duty. You don't have me kill myself or something." And then, of course, they did have him kill himself. But I'm probably somewhere in between you and Mr. Morris on this one, because I do think it got a little repetitive, but at the same token, I don't think that's unrealistic. And I related to a lot of it because some of the conversation was similar to some conversations I've had with my son. So where I pretty much played the Lewis role. Now he's never been in a position where I thought he was actually going to kill himself, but we've had some conversations where there were similar ups and downs in the conversation, including what you mentioned with Kellerman going after Cressetti, where this kind of mean-spiritedness at the time of hurt can come out of him in the same way. And then he'll, the projection of kind of throwing it back on me, like I'm the one who's attacking him when he's, done this defense mechanism. So I really thought, on the one hand, I agree with him. I thought it was good acting performances. The script, I don't think it's a weak script, but I think there were maybe some missed opportunities, and that it did seem like we had kind of a little bit of repetitiveness in the dialogue. But again, not necessarily unrealistic, but also maybe not as entertaining as some scenes could be. So, my score will probably wind up being between the two of you, but things that were good about it.
I mean, when people criticize a scene for being too long, I just think, well, that's just because they've got used to scenes under 3 minutes. And if they were watching a stage play, they wouldn't be complaining.
Yeah, I mean, that in itself, to me, I don't think is a bad thing. I think as long as you utilize it well, it can add to the drama, because it can really sort of, the more that a scene, stays in real time, the more, see, I disagree with what he said about taking the audience out. I think the opposite can happen, where you really feel like you're part of it, because you're going through the same time. That's why a show like 24 was so successful. I think is the whole, gimmick of the show was you're living these things at exactly the same time that the characters are. And so that, is the same kind of thing, where you can have, when the scene just stays there, and there's probably people in the audience, emotionally probably did think, oh, cut away, this is getting too intense, but at the same time, it ramps up the drama of it. And then the part where he takes the gun away from Kellerman, there really is sort of a little bit of a sense of relief there,
What you said there about your son is, a lot of times in real life, people have that in arguments where it's the same, making the same point again and again, that it's not neatly structured. As you said, that it goes around in these cycles, and then eventually they can get out of the cycle. But they do get the cycle because it's the same issues coming up again and again. And then the audience is thinking, oh, how are they going to resolve this?
Yeah, and I think over the course of the show, Homicide, there were 3 partnerships that really, got more time and focus than any others. And the first one, Munch and Bolander, obviously not as much, because Bolander was gone after the 3rd season. But the other 2, Baylison, Pimbleton, and Kellerman and Lewis, we get a lot of strong scenes between them. And in both cases, one of the reasons I love the show so much is that both of those partnerships, they seem very real in terms of how they go through their ups and downs, how they, in both cases, have times where they are together or split, but they never completely quit each other, as the saying goes, in terms of they still care about the other one, and they're still trying to work with them. And they both have times where one is stronger than the other. Earlier, we had scenes where Kellerman was the confident one, and Lewis was going through trouble, with his marriage and things like that. So we've seen kind of both sides of that relationship, and it'll continue to be the case as we go forward.
This is I got Maria's permission to show this. Can you see anything? Oh, now you can see it on screen.
Mm-hmm.
So I asked her about ESTPs maybe being a little bit all or nothing when it comes to like ethics, and I don't know if you agree with this, or whether you've seen this, or maybe they like maybe ESTP will like throw it back at you and say something like, "Oh, well, if you're so moral, like."
Yeah, well, I mean, even just earlier today, in the conversation I had with Morgan, I said it was about something really simple. It wasn't like a serious matter. It was about food. But I said, something to the effect of that like I would not get something or not take him somewhere because I knew he'd complain about it, and he said that that was like a diss. It wasn't like, oh, I'm not going to give you this because you don't like it, because I like actually respect what you like and don't like. I'm just not going to because I don't want to hear you complain.
Right.
I'm like,
go on.
Of all people to be telling me it sounds like a diss. I told him like 98% of everything you say sounds like a diss. You're always calling everybody ugly and stupid and all this other stuff. So you're going to get on me because I say I don't want to hear you complain? I mean, come on.
And it's like, you know where it puts here, Maria puts here that it's a source of pain. Well, what I think it would be is, I think that what ESTPs would hear when someone would criticize them is they might say something like, you're a dick, you're so insensitive, and it's like always like going at them like that. And if they keep hearing this stuff from them, and so it's a bit like what Morgan said about someone putting their feels on him, putting judgments on him and judging him. Is that what gets to him? Like these judgments. I'd say, oh, you did this because of this, like these judgments of character, this reading into his actions, motives, things like that.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it feels like the reason that Kellerman brought up Cressetti was he was actually trying to go for the quickest way he thought he could hurt Lewis.
Yeah.
And I don't know for sure if that was he wanted him to feel what he was feeling, or he just really did want to get rid of him and figured, well, if I say this, he's going to be insulted enough to leave. It's hard to tell which way he was going with that, and he may not even know. It may have just been he lashed out, and that was the thing he knew was the quickest he could say. But I think that forms part of the best part of the scene in terms of Lewis. You can tell he even says out loud he's not going to lose him like he did Cressetti. So he's making the conscious choice. No matter what he says, I'm not going to leave here and let him kill himself. I'm not going to leave here until I'm sure he's not going to do that. But then after that, after he's already got the gun away, so he's not just saying it because he's trying to talk Kellerman down anymore. He says, you're a better cop than Cressetti. So I think he really meant that.
Right. What we can do is, I think a nice theoretical question would be like, I mean, we might be overthinking this, but I'm thinking, if Kellerman were an ESTJ, do you think he would have reacted differently? These concerns, how do you think he would have? Like, if you were writing Kellerman, and if he were an ESTJ, how would his reactions be different from him as an ESTP?
That's the thing. From the start, he would have been different. So it's hard to say you can't drop ESTJ Kellerman into this situation because I can't say 100%. Obviously, it's a stereotype, but from the ESTJs I've known, in the situation Kellerman was in arson, they would have found a way to report the others rather than wait for it to come down.
That makes sense.
Even if they believed, cops don't tell another cops, I'm not saying that they would have necessarily testified in a grand jury, but they would have anonymously reported it and figured out a way to get themselves transferred out before it fell down on them. But I think in Kellerman's case, he looked the other way because his view of you don't rat out other cops is, as long as they're not doing something that is directly hurting me, I'm going to let them do what they're going to do.
Right.
Even in the Justice story where he was the primary that took down the cop that had shot the guy who shot his father.
Yeah.
He did that. Basically, he was ordered to go after. It wasn't really his choice. If he had been independently working on that case, he might have looked the other way on that one too. He might not have pursued him. He might have let it drop the way they basically did with the shooting of Pratt.
Oh, I got the impression there that it was Kellerman that decided to. Now, maybe he did it in order to prove himself as a detective, but it was him. It was he that came up with the idea of faking the guy out with the ballistics because
Yeah,
in truth,
well,
they
I'm not
throw
saying
the old.
once he got to that point, yeah, he was gonna take it all the way. But what I mean is, initially, before he had had gotten that far, it's G and Howard that were the ones that basically put him in the position where he had to go after Jake, because that was really that was who they believed really did it, and he had to rule him out first if he wasn't the guy who did it, but they thought that he was. And Kellerman probably instinctively knew he was too, which is why he knew he could get him. But I'm saying, in a vacuum where, Kellerman was the one who had the choice. If G and Howard really didn't know to have the information they had, if it was just the case got dropped on them and Kellerman was the one making the decisions from the start, he might have steered things away from where he wouldn't have been pursuing the cop. That's just my speculation, but just based on what his viewpoint is, I feel like he's somebody that he has that viewpoint, but if he's put in the position, and I can compare it to my son, like, he makes jokes about killing everybody or whatever, but obviously he's not really a murderer. But if you put him in a situation where he was a hired gun, and it was a situation where he's proving himself that he's going to do this and pursue this, then he would do it. But given the choice, all things being equal, he wouldn't really put himself in that position by choice, I don't think. So, similar thing is that, and as we've talked about before, SP morality can be somewhat situational, like everything else. So, what, and like we already talked about in the last episode, in the last review, you mentioned that he had expressed contempt for Jake's partner for giving him up.
Yeah.
So there was a part of Kellerman that was kind of hoping he wouldn't, like, even if he knew Jake was the killer, that the partner would not go for it, and that they wouldn't be able to prove it, so they wouldn't be able to arrest Jake. And if that happened, I don't think Kellerman would have been that disappointed that he didn't close the case.
Right. And if he were disappointed, he'd get over it quickly.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it would be like, all right, well, I think probably know what happened, but he's a cop. I'm not going to try to ruin his life, and we don't have the proof, so. If they're going to try to prosecute him, they're not going to be able to do it very strongly.
Although I think Lewis is a good case of, he's an SP, but he's not getting over this Cressetti thing quickly. So there are obviously things that it depends how big the event is, whether they get over it or not, because it's not like they're impervious.
No, it's certainly not. There's certainly things that can be traumatic enough in life that can stick with you a long time. And I think of the SPs, my opinion is ISFPs are the most likely to be long-term affected by emotional events in life.
And for the and for the functionalists out there, and even for the Kersey people, like the SFPs and especially ISFP, the FI Dom is more likely to maybe internalize, especially if it's like a situation where it's like either they blame themselves or like more of a moral thing, more something that has to do with them, more, you know what I mean, where it's like a sense of who they are, and they rather than say something physical that happened, if it's more something emotional, because they're generally more emotional anyway, then I would say the STPs are going to get over that quicker.
And that's one of the reasons why I enjoy the Kellerman-Lewis partnership so much, is that we see evidence over time of that very thing, where things will stick with Lewis a little longer, and he'll bring them back up, whereas Kellerman is less likely to do that. He can be more riled up in the moment even than Lewis, but then he moves on faster and is on to the next thing to get riled up about.
So what I was thinking, the reason why I asked that thing, if Kellerman were in the ESTJ, what I'm sort of getting at is the way that, first of all, the way that Kellerman talked about honor, was that consistent with ESTP, or would many people of different temperaments have talked like that in that situation?
Yeah, I mean, again, people use the same words differently. And, if you're comparing to the way SJs see honor, it's not going to necessarily be the same. Parts of it will be, what he said about him being a war hero and things like that. That obviously is something that would factor in for an SJ as well. But I think to me, and maybe I'm reading this in just because I'm thinking of it in terms different terms, but it seemed like to me from what he said in the episode that even though Kellerman brought up the fact he was in the Korean War and things like that, and he was trying to take care of his family, things that would all be like guardian, respectful things, but he seemed to be more impressed that that Mr. Rowe, the shopkeeper, had actually gone after the drug dealers himself to try to get them away. So he seemed to have more respect for his action of doing that than he did for, the other stuff. And so that seems consistent to me with the way artisans are usually more impressed with something that's more bold action than it is necessarily traditional action. And that seemed like something that really impressed him, that especially once he found out it was Luther Mahoney that he was involved with, that this guy would go to Luther Mahoney's home base and talk to him, basically to tell him to get away. He didn't specifically say it, but he was basically thinking that took balls, that the guy did that.
Yes.
Because he might have not made it out of there alive.
Yeah, and he also mentioned to Mahoney because it's like, he's an old guy, and he's saying, what are you going after an old guy like that? Because like I said, he was in Korea, and this is the 1990s, so he would have been pretty old. Mm-hmm. Maybe in his 70s. Yeah. But what I was sort of thinking was, I know this is a little bit of functionalism, but a lot of what Kellerman talked about was his reputation of how people. So he's thinking about how they're looking at him, like his reputation. So if we call that an FE thing, where he's concentrated on what other people think of him, rather than the emphasis. I know it's like situational, rather than the emphasis of being on the ethics of it. I know the situation calls for that, but for him, it's like how people look at him.
Yeah.
It's like, you think I'm a dirty cop, and he hates the fact that they're looking at him like that.
Yeah, once again, it's a contrast between him and Lewis, because Lewis is looking at it more from his individual morality than he is at the image thing. It's easier for Lewis to blow off the what people think of me kind of thing. It's not that it's entirely, that he doesn't care. You can tell Lewis cares somewhat. He wants to look smooth and, kind of, aloof and stuff like that. That's part of his sort of image he tries to manifest. But
and it's part of his type of ebonics, type of like manner, where he's initially quite cool, but then he does like come back with these FI thing.
Yeah, so he's again, why it makes a good partnership, because you have both sides of the coin in terms of both feeling and thinking and how they do it, in opposite ways.
Yeah, the reason why I brought up the ebonics thing is that Lewis, he tries to be cool, like the people around. So it's like maybe keeping it real, I suppose. A little bit different from Frank, who's like a completely different approach, where he doesn't want to fit in at all, really.
Yeah.
People in Baltimore. He's like...
And we got a little bit of that in this episode, where Frank had shaved his head, but then he's wearing the hat so that people can't see the scar.
Yeah.
And when he's asked why, he says, I don't know. And then later in the episode, he says, I'll grow it back, or I'm going to grow it back. So
I think it would have been interesting to pair up Lewis and Pembleton.
Well, stay tuned.
Because of the issue of Pembleton might think, why you got to talk like that? And then Lewis might think, well, why you got to talk like that? And like maybe
we've already had that pairing happen a couple of times, in single episodes, like the one where they worked together on the one where the bullet had been shot up in the air and killed the person in the parking lot.
But, I mean, what it's really about is, and we sort of know this, like Frank had a classical education taught by the Jesuits, so really high class, like A standard education, where he was taught because remember, I had that case with the fake intellectual with the Pratt, and
Yeah.
Lewis and Frank was saying, well, this is what the Jesuits told me, and he was like reading the Greek, and so he was like really educated, and then Lewis, they had that story where his, I think it was his brother, became insane, and Lewis is from the streets. He's part of that, and what I was just saying is that, as you said, that Lewis tries to pretend to be cool and with it, and I sort of like see that as part of like the Ebonics type culture, where it's like being smooth and cool.
I didn't say he was pretending to be cool. I just said that.
Well, it's part of him.
I just said he cares that people see him that way.
Yes,
you can tell that he wants to have that image.
Yeah, that is still street. That is still from the street and part of his background.
But you see, and we've already seen that conflict come up before, where sort of that versus being a cop and how that plays out.
Yes.
And you've seen more than one occasion when he's talking to a criminal that's black, and he uses that phrase, "my brother," like in a disparaging way, like in a sarcastic way. And he did it again in this one with Mahoney.
And I love the story. Oh, that's my alarm. I really like the story. I have it on Classic FM. I love the story where it was Lewis and the Muslims, and they were talking about the Muslims that did good things for the community, and Lewis was sort of torn between the way they were over-controlling, but also the good things that they did. And so that was good about Lewis's background. So I just think that those are good issues there. With
there's an example of I guess you could say the closest to an ESTJ version of Kellerman would be that guy who was the leader of the Muslims in that episode, because you could tell that he wasn't exactly operating under the letter of the law, but he had like his own law that was basically, this is the way we're operating, and so he had his code of honor within that that he was operating by. So he was still following this kind of structured honor system, but it was not necessarily in the same way that somebody else would.
Yeah, you see, this was a little thing from Socionics where Socionics is bigoted towards extroverted sensing, and they sort of see this sort of combination of the warriors with like the vision from the NFJs, and so it's like that Muslim guy is like got the religion of their, right, we're doing it for this is like our ideology, we're doing it for this reason, combined with the force element and the control element. And
I thought you were going to say it was bigoted towards Russians.
No, but it's hard. Let's just say that Islam is very beta quadra in terms of a lot of force, a lot of violence in the name of something that they very much believe in. So there's that sort of like legitimizing it with this kind of like strong belief and ethical code type of thing. And of course, the way the brothers were depicted was a hell of a lot more tamer version of that. And you got that bit with Malcolm X, I suppose, where you've got the ideology sort of like legitimizing the power aspect, I suppose.
Only in our review videos, folks, are the only TV reviews where you'll hear a phrase like Islam is very beta quadra.
Yeah, well, it is very, very beta quadra.
I don't even know what that means, but I don't want you to explain it to me. So
yeah, not live on air anyway. And I've got another hangout. But deal with it, folks. Islam is a warrior religion. It was a piece of genius by a military leader. Right. Now, so that will be about it. And I think that this review is fantastic. I think it's 9 out of 10. And these are the.
Did you even show the pictures like more than like 2 seconds?
I'll put them back up. But the reason why I give this review 9 out of 10 is because of, if you want to know about sensing types, this is the place to be. Because Jeff is an SP, and he knows a lot about SPs, and he knows a lot about Homicide, and Homicide's really well written for showing the differences between SJs and SPs. And we also saw a little bit from Bayliss, you know, when he talked about being worried about Kellerman. I thought that was a little bit SFJ.
Yeah.
But although he might have said that to get it frank a little bit, I don't know. What was your thoughts about that? About
yeah, probably a little of both. I mean, I don't think he was lying about that, but on the one hand, and he didn't know what to say to Kellerman. It was funny when he told him he shouldn't let Gaffney get to, like, he wasn't. You could see a look on Kellerman's face because he wasn't the first one to tell him that. Of course, my reaction when she popped up was, "Oh no, I forgot that they had more with her," because I don't like her very much. So.
Yeah, I thought about her. They crowbarred her in, but I also thought that Kellerman did do that SP response where he said millions. Yes, I got millions out of them.
Yeah, well, the exchanges I actually thought were good. In fact, it does a good job of sort of setting up, kind of the way Kellerman is still, the adrenaline is still pumping. He's still pissed off about this, and he sees her, and then immediately. So even though I was like, I don't like her, I still liked that scene because I liked him getting to tell her off. Yeah,
and the language was quite fruity in this episode, where you had bitch, used, and piss, which is quite strong for network television. And also they said the N-word as well, and chink. So it's pretty fruity.
I think fruity might mean something different. Where you
salty. It's salty dialogue for 1990s network television.
Yeah, in fact, there was really only once that I thought they sort of copped out of the language, but they sort of had to because he couldn't really say what he would say. But he said piece of work.
Yeah,
but I thought they could have used piece of crap instead. But anyway, at least because they sort of allowed that. But what I learned, of course, about network TV censorship, at least in those days, is that there were words where they would basically have a quota of times they could be used within one episode, and you couldn't go past your quota of that word. And crap was one of those. Like if he already had 3 or 4 craps in the episode, you couldn't have another one.
Yeah, but see, the thing is, the reason I don't like that is just I don't like the mental image. And I think that's an SJ sign, where to sort of like give him permission to be messy, because it's like, if a cluttered desk is the sign of a cluttered mind, what is the sign of an empty desk? So it's like, maybe it's like Bayliss has to like have a justification for having a messy desk.
I wouldn't be surprised if Munch was the one who put that up.
yes, it is probably him as well. But Bayliss has kept it there.
And we didn't mention there's the Munch moment in this one too, where he's talking.
Oh, we had lots of good ones.
Where he's talking to Howard, and she's asking him what's the point, and he's like, I'm just telling you what I heard. What's your point?
So what I was saying, so with that first half had really good dialogue. It wasn't like when I was complaining before. Because remember, in the previous seasons, I was saying, the dialogue's a bit dull. But then I was also saying, well, I don't want it cheesy, one-liner, one-liner, one-liner. I want that nice balance where it's witty, but it sounds real. And I thought this had that right balance.
Yeah, and I said before, I think that David Simon's influence was definitely a positive one when he joined the staff in the 5th season, in terms of trying to get at better dialogue.
Yep. So that's it, folks. I have another hangout. Go on, Jeff.
Well, I was going to say, you gave the review a 9 out of 10, but what do you give the episode?
Oh, I give the episode 9 out of 10.
Okay.
Which is the maximum I give it, because I can't give a 10 out of 10 because no real thing is perfect.
Well, I think you did earlier, though. I can think of at least one that I think you gave a 10. But anyway, we'll get into that. But I will give it an 8, so an average of 8.5 for that one. And next episode, folks, is the directorial debut. We've already had a couple of episodes directed by Clark Johnson. The next one is directed by Kyle Secor.
Oh, that's good.
And it's called. And we'll also get a chance for that pairing the Ben's longing for of Pemberton and Lewis working together, because that will happen in the next episode. And it is called Diener. So join us next time for Diener.
Oh yeah, and I actually listened to what the previous episode to find out what the next one's called, and also I actually liked it. I actually maybe more enjoyed Lewis's reaction to Kellerman than Kellerman in this particular episode. So I'll leave that with folks. So bye bye, folks.
All right, bye.